So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Conquer the Clutter podcast for, February 22nd. So, I just want to give you a little bit of an alert. Coast to coast, we're going to be having a weather event, a storm, and apparently very few of us are going to be exempt. So, I just want to give you a caution. If you haven't heard about it, it is supposed to be a pretty severe weather warning. Please don't take any chances because I seriously enjoy seeing your smiling faces every week. And apparently it's going to be a doozy. So maybe set in some provisions or whatever today because it's arriving this evening and it is going sweeping coast to coast. All right. So I'll be thinking of you. Stay safe. All right. So one more possible event that is likely to happen, it's not 100% definite, is that about the timing of our next podcast, I've been asked to be a subject area expert witness at a human rights tribunal on hoarding to interpret what reasonable accommodation might be for the court. And so if I'm going to ask you to send positive thoughts that the people are reasonable enough to settle before this event has to happen. And there is some possibility of that. But if it doesn't, it looks like I'm it for tag for 2 full days. So that would interfere with my ability to prepare for the podcast. So almost certainly it would mean that in 2 weeks, there's a lower probability there will be a podcast. Okay, still some possibility, but so it'll be posted in the Get Response. We'll send that out as soon as I know. Okay, so back to today's discussion topic. We are winding up our discussion about attachment patterns, and anybody who thinks that attachment doesn't affect or influence hoarding behavior or the desire to hold on to things and clutter. There are a number of other comorbidities as well, but fundamental to all of them is how we attach. All right. So it is a big player or a small player, but it is a player. So it's worth our while to understand attachment. We've talked about secure attachment already. We're going to talk about insecure attachment today, which isn't as pleasant, but is important. And the degree to which, by the end of it, I'm hoping that everyone will be able to see ways that it possibly plays out, even in your life today, at many, many levels. All right. So we're going to take a little peek also at the recovery workbook that I showed you. Remember the 2 of them, the green one and the white one. We're going to deal a little more with the one by Glenn Shirelli, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Recovery Workbook. So by the end, get your papers and pencils handy, because by the end of it, I'm going to be going through different segments of the book, and I'd like you to be putting a tick, all right, beside anything that registers with you, all right, because the purpose in doing that would be to give you a sense of the types of experiences, all right? They're not all terribly traumatic to have an influence. It doesn't have to have been something that is, branded on your brain. It's in there playing its part. And not just the event, but the degree to which you might have developed and be holding on to the legacy of that adversity, all right? And that can continue And of course, it can become more complicated the less you are aware of it, the less your antenna are up and can identify, I think that's more about this than it is about today or me or my worth or my capability to handle what comes into my life. All of that is the basis for making connections. All right. And the connections are the basis for how we process day-to-day events, including on a good day, bad day, somewhere in between day. All right. We are like a river. We have our current and we have our ups and our downs. No 2 days are exactly the same. And so in the back of our awareness, our process for how we handle ourselves, our interpretations, the events that are going to happen today, we all have fears, all right? Right now, I have to tell you, if that door opened and a snake came in here, I would be behaving very differently, all right? Do you know, are you aware of the things that represent even minor disruptions, all right? So fears would be a big one. But so right now, I want you to write down 2 of your fundamental beliefs about how you and anyone else should live their life. What are your beliefs? Just 2 of them. Now, as you look at those 2 beliefs, in the last week, how many days were there where those beliefs played out, or you had to remind yourself of them? How uppermost are they in your mind? And while they're being uppermost in your mind, are you aware, all right, fully aware of what other beliefs you hold? Things like, oh, I should keep it just in case. Oh, I haven't used it, but you know what? I paid a lot of money for that. And it's too much money just to let it go, even though I haven't used it at all. And it's occupying space that I need for something else in my life today. And we can't find any gray zone. We call a belief that is hard and fast, regardless of context, regardless of the effect on you and your life. All right. Does it improve your life? Is it holding you back? Does it get in the way? We're talking about those beliefs being limiting beliefs. Not all beliefs are equal. Are you able to gauge what beliefs are holding you back? There doesn't say there's anything wrong with the belief. It's just not functioning in your life at this time. All right. And my hope is that by the time we finish this segment and you have had a look at the workbook, you will be more aware of the little hum in the background that gets in the way of you fully understanding and hearing what you're actually saying to yourself. All right. Now you've got your pens and paper out. Okay. What would you say your strongest value is? Not the thing you value the most, but a value that you hold and you try to live out and you expect other people to live out. What would you say the strongest operating value is for you? It's Anti-Bullying Day. Thank you. At least in British Columbia. Okay. How many times, and are you aware, how many times when something's happening and you haven't kind of got a full grip on it, Do you get a sensation, like a feeling? You feel a sensation. Where do you feel it? Are you aware that there is some real possibility that that sensation you have harkens back to a time a long time ago when a similar type of event that meant the same to you was happening, and that is all you had to go on? That's all you had in the way of processing. All right. And so it stays with you to one degree or another, trying to give you an alert. Are you aware of those sensations? Every time you have a headache, every time you have a stomach ache, every time your neck stiffens, every time what? What's the sensation? Have you ever just been going along kind of on neutral? It's an okay day, and something happens and it prompts a visual image. It's not what you're actually seeing, it's an image that presents itself to you. Some people process, particularly those people I think that are highly kinesthetic and highly visual. They kind of get a visual image and you think, what? What's that? Okay. Those visual images can be, they're not always, but they can be kind of a little mini flashback. All right. A little flash of the way, remember, at this time, all of this was happening, this insecure attachment was happening, or secure attachment was happening. You're pre-verbal. It's not words that are making sense. That's not your way to maneuver through these situations. It's purely sensual. Forgot to turn my phone off. I'm so sorry, people. I'll do it now. You're going to have to edit that one, Braden. She forgot to turn her phone off. Okay, there we go. All right. So you've got your thoughts, your values, your beliefs, your sensations. When you connect all of those together, all right, how confident are you that in connecting all of those together, and it takes me longer to say it than it does for you to think it, when you connect all those things together, how much do you believe that the connections you make that are the basis for your decisions are more likely to be on sound ground than kind of a conclusion in the moment? Have you ever had a complete wowie when you had an impression and then later on you learned the facts about it? All right. We apply those meanings not just to the events in our life, we also apply them to things. When I work with you with clutter, that's what's happening. We are applying values, beliefs, fears, sensations, flashbacks, memories to things. Okay. And we are deciding to keep them as part of our life or to let the ones go that are questionable, depending on our confidence level, that when we put all the pieces together, it actually represents something we won't regret. Do you see how insecure attachment and secure attachment are a part of that? They're like a part of our electrical network, because insecure attachment in childhood can result in many different adult patterns, all right? And they play out by symptoms that are happening, they happen to us, but they're outside of our conscious awareness. They're almost like they feel almost part of us. And we are more likely to repeat what is familiar, even if it didn't work, because we form a pattern, we form a relationship with it. And we hold on to those beliefs, right? That's why it's so important to raise our awareness about how insecure attachment might be playing out today in your life, all right? And may have been an influencer on past unresolved issues. We just took it as fact. All right. I told you that story about the CPAP machine, the two different pricings. I came at that as fact. All right. I thought it was fact that there had to be a discrete difference in each of those units, right? Always go to fact, never go to fear. Always check the facts. Never go to fear. If you're in a state of fear, and I'm not talking about fear like somebody opened the door and threw a snake in here. I'm talking about just insecurity. Just center yourself, get yourself to a good enough common balance. All right. And then ask yourself, what's the evidence? What does the evidence tell me? If I look at the situation, how many yeses are there and how many no's are there? Double check. All right. And that's a good way to start. What is the evidence in front of me? What do I know to be true? Not what do I think? All right. Not what do I believe, because I believed, and look how accurate that was. All right. Big difference from 1900 to 23,000 for no apparent reason as it checked out. All right. Your homework this week is to start that process, particularly when you're feeling unsure. All right. That's a good time to give yourself an opportunity to think a little differently. All right. Now, we're going to go through a list that it's not the complete list because I didn't want to plagiarize Glenn Schiraldi's assessment tool. However, I would like you to have a really concrete idea of the diversity of things that can play a part in adverse childhood experiences. Now, they are talking about adverse childhood experiences. These are not all traumatic events, but they're not on the plus side for sure. So the question I want you to ask yourself when you get a little, sounds familiar. There's another one. All right. The question I want you to ask yourself is this. How big is that in my life? How big? What is not just the event, but the degree? So is it a biggie or that's part of the hum in the background? I think that might be part of the hum in the background. Yeah, that does happen a fair amount, and I've never really paid attention to it. Might be time to scrutinize it a bit better. Okay, so what I want you to do, though, please, is don't mark yourself. Don't score yourself. You don't have enough of the parameters that give those results meaning, true meaning. Just want you to get a sense of, there might be more here than I thought. All right. Now, all right. So I just want you to have a better idea, leaving this discussion, of insecure attachment and how it rears its head. All right. How it tends to rear its head. And that way you can be ready for it. All right. You can either give it merit or not give it merit. So giving it merit might be getting a copy of the book. Giving it merit might be sometime late in the spring, it was going to be March, but now it's going to be later because of this trial. Sometime late in the spring, I'm going to be rehosting the support groups. And one of the support groups is going to be for people who have looked at their clutter issues as well before. They're not just starting out. And they believe, based on the list we're going to talk about today, there might be some things that they want a bit of guidance on as a group to move forward beyond the hurdles. So there are a number of what we call overarching categories. The first overarching category is your emotional and physical arousal. How emotionally volatile, or we call it labile, all right? Labile just means it moves easily from one to the other, all right? Is your emotional arousal. How quickly do you react? How quickly does your body react, and where does it react? Write down right now. If you had a positive that happened, a biggie in your life right now, where would it register? Where would your body tell you, "Ooh, this is a good thing"? And if it wasn't a good thing, if it was a negative thing, where would that register? Probably not the same place. Are you aware of the messages your body is trying to give you? And you didn't come up with that as an adult, all right? That pattern developed over time, and it probably started with you as a munchkin, okay? The next overarching category is your worldview. I told you that story this morning, which I won't repeat because now we're recording, and I don't want to be sued, but it is true. I can send you the facts if you need to. Your worldview, I was operating from a worldview. I was operating from a worldview of responsibility and reasonableness, and that people who were living in an environment that was disadvantaged wouldn't increase the disadvantage for their fellow compatriots. Did anybody hear the flush in the background? Okay, because that one went right down the tubes. All right, I'm going to have to rethink my worldview. I really am. Like I'm telling people that story not to spread it, just because I want to see the look on your face if you are as stunned as I was. And clearly, I still am a little bit. I don't want to give up that worldview, but I think I'm going to have to adapt it a little. Okay. Okay, the next overarching category is your coping methods. Now, clearly, my coping methods are to share, okay, and to accept feedback. Not cynicism, but feedback. What are your coping methods? Do you have adequate coping methods? And how? Even if you look at the entirety of your lifespan and your coping methods, how have they had to adapt, and maybe not for the better, over the last 2.5 years of COVID? That's a long time to be more isolated. That's a long time to feel more alone. And it's a very long time to feel afraid or concerned about a vague enemy like a virus. All right. And who might be a spreader in your environment. You see how all of this is like pieces of a picture? This is your picture. And your picture is different. All right. We have 39 people here today. There are 39 different pictures with different pieces in them. What's yours? The next overarching category, all right, is your posture. Who knew it? What are you telegraphing by how you hold yourself? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are you telegraphing to others? And how are they using it for their benefit or your benefit? All right. We telegraph through our body language. And the biggest part of our body language is from our head to our feet. The next overarching category is spoken or unspoken messages. Sometimes that distressed look on a person's face, all right, is just a case of gas. How do you know the difference? You check the facts. You ask the person, how are you doing? How are you doing? You ask the other. You don't just decide, that person is. And you also don't encourage other people to do the same to you and decide things about you. Because we will respond to the messages and the body language of other people. It's okay to be a bit more assertive and say, you're looking at me funny. Is there anything we need to talk about? The other thing that many people avoid, all right, but it is important, and it doesn't necessarily, everybody has a story. No one gets into this life or out of this life without things happening to us and because of us, all right? The next overarching category is any trauma symptoms. Are you aware of what trauma symptoms are? Well, we know fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, but are you aware of how those play out for you? Okay, so I mentioned about the groups, the level 1, level 2, level 3, and the ACE group, sometime probably starting end of April is what I'm thinking, all right? I just want you to be aware because I've received a lot of emails asking if the groups are going to happen, and I intended to start them again in February, but life took over, all right? So, all right, so here we are. We're going to move on in the next 20 minutes to details of the assessment scale that Glenn Chiaraldi in the Adverse Childhood Experiences Recovery book, all right, lists. So remember, don't score yourself. Just get a sense, all right? Because the degree to which you are aware or not aware means that the not aware is more likely to create vague or hidden barriers, all right? Just get a sense of how these might apply to you. And if they feel big, just put a plus after, okay? Did a parent or other adult in your household often swear at you, use profane language or violent language or demeaning language, insulting language, reducing you, leaving you feeling put down? So swear, insult, put down, or act in a way that made you afraid, not just physically afraid, but afraid of repercussions. Mm-hmm. Did they respond in a way that made you feel that you were at risk of being physically hurt? That could also be deprived, all right? Something taken away from you that was especially important to you. Did a parent or adult in the household push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? More commonly than not, was that their go-to? Or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you inappropriately? Or try to get you to behave this way toward them? Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you, understood you, or held you as important? Was your family the kind of family that did or did not, in the case of this assessment tool, it's not, didn't look out for one another? Or when a member was vulnerable, support each other? Was it every man for himself? Did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat? You were embarrassed because you had to wear dirty clothes. You had no one to protect you when you needed it. And it wouldn't have, or comfort you. It doesn't have to be that you needed protection because something violent was going to happen. You just needed comfort. You needed a shoulder. Or thought you might need protection. Might be, my goodness, I've read a number of stories now about children going to school. Who knew? Who knew? Might need protection from bullies at school, or bullies on the bus, or bullies on the walk home. Or your parents were too impaired. And it doesn't matter what socioeconomic group you belong to, impaired is impaired, people. You get to call it. All right? Too impaired to take care of you, to remain present as parents. If your parents were divorced or separated, was your mother or your own mother, or as a result of the divorce or separation, or your step-parent often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at them? Were they threatened with injury, or were they actually injured? Did you live with anyone? It doesn't have to be a parent. Just live with one who was a problem drinker, or an alcoholic, or used street drugs. So they wouldn't consider themselves a drug addict or an addict, right? Because it was even soft drugs, all right? Or abused prescriptions. That's not on here, but abused prescriptions as well. Was a household member depressed or often mentally ill or sporadically mentally ill, and there was no backup? Did a household member attempt self-harm or go to prison? It's the absence. It's less the prison. It's more the removal of that household member, okay? Children generalize the experience of others that they see, particularly when it's part of their clan, as being a possibility for them. That's why suicide is so dangerous. You break you break a barrier when somebody particularly if you're related to them in the family, suicides. Okay. Did a household member attempt self-harm or go to prison? Here's something too that I would add. Did a household member or someone intimate, like we're not talking a neighbor necessarily, engage in histrionic or emotional blackmail? Were they drama? Were they drama kings and queens? All right. And through whatever means, did anyone who was particularly important to you, all right, disappear due to death, natural death, death by violence? Here's one that I guess I've been protected from, but many people aren't. Deportation. So a good parent who is snatched and deported. Abduction. Deployment to war or to a war zone. Maybe it's not actually a war. Military families, for instance, or paramilitary families. All right. Loss of a close family member or friend due to any of those. All right. Witnessing, and think of this now in these days, witnessing as a child, witnessing disasters such as floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, or hurricanes. And just by way of an aside right now, if you pray for all of those children who are in the Ukraine and Turkey these days. My goodness. All right. These are things that do happen. All right. Serious illness. All right. Of a loved one. So that could be, in my case, for instance, I think I was about 5, well, maybe 4, when my mother developed uterine cancer, and she was unfortunately pregnant at the time. And now it wasn't traumatic for me because I was sent to my favorite aunt in the States. And she was a pushover. She was a pushover. So do you see how it affects you is the issue, not that it happened. Now, mind you, coming back into the family, I'm sure I picked up vibes that my mother had been very, very ill because she refused to abort the baby. And she was 6 months pregnant when they found it. All right. So I'm sure there was a history there. But just because it's not the event itself that creates the adversity. All right. It's the effect on you. How about living in a home with openly hostile, not violent, just openly hostile parents, caregivers? Just that day-to-day hostility. Expressed by, not unknown, off the charts type of behavior, just losing their temper. Just consistently, repeatedly, ad hoc losing their temper. Being coercive, that's a biggie. And unwilling and unavailable to listen to you when you needed someone to listen to you, to hear you. The effects of parents who are consistently arguing, don't have time or space or awareness for the little ones around them. All right. You can't be present in 2 engagements at the same time. If you're busy fighting with a partner all the time, all right, there's a lot you miss with your children's needs. There being too many children in the family to get parental attention. It's nobody's fault, but it's a reality. 2 people only divide out so many ways. And nobody can be present. Here's a good example. Nobody can be present all the time just because at a particular time you had a particular need. There doesn't have to be malintent in a lot of this. All right. How about mothers with prenatal or perinatal stress? How about those mothers in Uganda? All right. Whose babies are being sustained by a Coke bottle. with a tube in it. And the seal, is medical tape. Or any other mother whose baby or father whose baby is stressed. Stress spreads. How about anxiety that you have felt? It's kind of like a vague theme about measuring up. For example, sometimes generated not by abuse, not what would normally be considered abuse, but it's somewhere on that continuum. Highly critical parents. Okay. Or the inverse is also not good. It's not positive. Overprotective parents. Did you ever have the right to pay the consequences for the choices you were making? Or were you protected, overly protected, and prevented from learning lessons by the school of hard knocks? Were your mistakes or your errors explained away so that you never felt you had to take responsibility and pay the price? Right? Because no one's going to do that for you as an adult. That is a form of neglect. All right. Helicopter parents. Feeling that too much is expected of you. Witnessing violence in the community, in your neighborhood or at school. So the children who get bullied, okay, and there are some alarming pictures of many schools, many buses. All right. But what about the other children? What about the other children who are learning to adapt and cope so they don't get targeted? All right. They're affected as well. It's not just the child being picked on, including online. Okay. Including bullying or harassed, picked on by someone online. Did you ever suffer from discrimination or being treated differently, mistreated as a result of a disability? Your race, where you were born, your sexual orientation, or confusion about it, your religion. Were you isolated in some way by being excluded, resulting in you having no close friends? How do you learn your social skills? All right. How do you learn your social skills that will be so important as an adult if you were isolated or excluded? Were you ever homeless as a child? Were you forced into or coerced into a marriage? The benefit of looking and considering the aspects of this assessment tool, all right, as it relates to you, is important because it can reassure, if we do the work, if you do the work alone or you join the group, whichever works best for you. All right. But coming to a point of realizing your reactions make sense. They stop being vague, kind of, and I can't put my finger on it 100%, sure, but that is an awful lot like this other situation. Okay. These situations, unfortunately, are common enough. Hopefully not many of them to you and I, but they are to many people in this world. And they create, and if they are common to you, they create understandable response, an understandable response. They also create attachment disruptions because they interfere with trust and they affect our sense of being worthy and important enough to be entitled to being loved and treated with respect. Even if today your only takeaway is knowing that you're not alone, all right, there are now 40 people here, and I guarantee you there are 40 different pictures, little puzzle pieces, all right? What is yours? Because the effects can and will be slightly different for each one of us. How can you best unload this, okay, and help you process the work that's involved in the ACE recovery workbook? I would, if you ticked more than, I don't know, depending on which ones, a comfortable number, like, if you're at all concerned, at least get yourself a copy of the workbook. Whether you join the group or not, that's okay. All right. You can suggest topics to add to our podcast list, and I'm happy to do the research and to bring you my experience as well. You don't necessarily need a group, but what I want you to do is I want you to learn to accept yourself rather than blame, and then know that you are worth moving on and forward from there in the direction that is most important to you. And in whatever ways you need it to be understood, first to treat yourself with compassion, gentleness, all right, while you experience these reactions on your way to putting them to bed once and for all, to healing from them, to not letting them become accidental tripping hazards, all right? Because every single one of us, myself included, all right? Every single one of us, and anybody who says it's not so probably isn't telling you the truth, the entire truth, all right? We all need in some ways to self-parent ourselves. Parents aren't perfect, all right? And sometimes things get fouled up, even when parents were trying to be good parents. And some parents are so overburdened and overtaxed that there isn't enough left over to be the parent that you needed at the time that the challenge or the developmental milestone was being targeted, trying to reach, developing trust, developing confidence, developing self-regulation. All of these things also have a high probability of interfering with your ability to self-regulate well enough. Anybody here have difficulty, like we're talking severe difficulty, making a plan and following the plan reliably to conclusion? Okay. Life gets in the way. First, you need to see it for what it is. Then you need to get the right resources. Then you need to work it. All right. And you're worth it. My friends, you are worth it. So, papers and pen. What is the one thing, based on what you've heard today, what is the one thing you're going to do a tiny bit differently often enough that it could be easier to make it a pattern. Doesn't have to be right out of the gate. What is the one thing? Can you write it down this week? Any thoughts? Let me have a look at the chat. Okay, the chat box. Where am I? All right. Yeah, I've got trouble following the plan. We all do at some time. The thing is, find out what's in the way and deal with it. And then the parent that is left for you, so they're often not present. And then the parent that is left. Yes, that's true. It's not just the parent who exited, it's also the parent that is left, the shock that they have to deal with, and the ability to be present. Yeah, what a list. I know. I need to listen to this again. Can someone put a link in the chat so I can access this recording? Okay. One of the things I'm going to do then, Graham, is I'm seeing Braden today. I'm going to ask him to make a point to edit this, just check the editing of this podcast and get it up right away. Okay, we're not talking within 24 hours, but it probably would be within 3 days, hopefully. Okay, so I will ask him to make this one a priority. The other thing you can do, all right, is get yourself a copy of the book. Almost all as well. I often wonder how. Yeah, it's true. Based on, it seems to be a predictable outcome. It is not an unanticipated outcome. And neuroplasticity, which is a big word, I wish I had a simpler word, brain growth. Our brains are capable of growing and changing. They really are. Okay. The thing that gets in the way of us learning to grow and change is self-habituation. All right. What we do the most, what we habituate, becomes the pattern. It isn't the pattern, no more so than the other, but whatever you practice the most, that's what you get better at, and that is what you're more likely to do, even if it's not the wisest. Yeah. Look here. Shauna says, my really warped sense of humor helps me cope, kind of. Laughing at it is also a good idea, but then you still have to do something about it. I did check with the hospital, Colleen. They could purchase a direct. I'm trying to put there. No, they could. The problem is the hospital, Colleen, has no money. When you see the video tour of the hospital, you're going to realize just how they are making so much happen with absolutely nothing. So they didn't know who the provider was, the manufacturer. So yeah. Support groups for clutter, absolutely. Sibling rivalry. You know what, though? Here's the thing about sibling rivalry, and it's true. It is a very powerful thing. The thing about sibling rivalry is if you have a box, and I don't mean to say that our siblings are rats, but think of it as rats in a box, all right? Because we don't react a lot differently from rats in a box or pigs in a pen, all right? So as you remove resources, all right, as you remove and limit resources, guess what the rats do? They turn on each other. Guess what the pigs do? They turn on each other. but that's a manufactured conflict. And it generally something not very healthy is going on when there's significant sibling rivalry. Some rivalry is normal, right? Some, but not enough that it would stand out as an adult. All right, so if there was rivalry in your family, and you remember it as an adult and it's still there at present, I have news for you. There's something in the dynamic of the way parents interacted with their children that probably is a foundation piece of that. Yeah, because that doesn't happen on its own. Little bit, but not enough to stand out. I'm sorry you lost your dad as such a young child. Can you put the link to the workbook in the chat, the ones that you were referring to? Oh, somebody did already. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Recovery Workbook. Thank you, whoever did that. All right. Okay. Yes. And the other one, I'll show you this. Hafsa, can you put the other one in as well? I'll just get it. This is the other one. It is, can I put it in? Where is it? Type message here. All right. I'm the world's worst typist. How's that one? The Living Legacy of Trauma by J-A-N-I-N-A Fisher. There we go. I find the other book more comprehensive. This book is fine, but I find the other book by Glenn Schiraldi, I find that more comprehensive than this one. Okay. All right. So I hope to see you in, it's not next week, is it? No, it's 2 weeks from now, I think. Yeah, it's 2 weeks. Next Wednesday should be fine for the podcast. I was wrong. It's the week after that that is questionable, depending on the Human Rights Tribunal. So you take care. Everybody have a great week. Watch out for the weather. And that too shall pass. One can only hope. I'm so tired of winter. So tired of winter. Anyway, you take care, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.